Hello, this is Greg Jeffers.
You think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim. But I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. You think the only people who are people are the people who look and think like you. But if you walk the footsteps of a stranger, you'll learn things you never knew, you never knew.
When my earliest American ancestors landed at Jamestown and Massachusetts in the early 1600s, or New Jersey and Pennsylvania in the later 1600s, life expectancy for a European man was about 3 years. It is estimated that disease and violence would claim the lives of 85% of the men, and they were all men, who settled in Jamestown. Virginia was a malarial swamp. Germ theory hadn't come along yet. In addition to malaria, waterborne diseases, and infections from lack of sanitation, Native Americans engaged in brutal slaughters of the European settlers that led to a tit-for-tat response from the Europeans. There was no theme music in the background like there is in the Hollywood movies. The natives were not pacifists. Most of the European settlers had no idea of the terrible living conditions or the very short life expectancy that would befall them. Life was, as it had always been, a raw battle with nature for survival and progeny. But that's not how Hollywood likes to tell this tale. The era of leftist, nihilist propaganda took off in the late 1970s with the availability of VHS and later DVD video technology. This was a generation before high-speed internet arrived on the scene. The children who watched these animated propaganda films hundreds of times are now in their 30s and 40s. And it is worth mentioning that their young mothers were targets of this propaganda and infected and harmed by it too. These propaganda films, directed at children and their young mothers, were produced by people with a plan. If you unpack this disgraceful propaganda directed at our children and their young mothers, you will discover how we arrived here in the age of rage. Here is a text from that video clip. You think you own whatever land you land on. Well, that's a nice opening accusation. No mention of the fact that 20% of the skulls of Native American men show severe head trauma, the kinds of wounds that could only have resulted from violence between men. In other words, warfare. The Native Americans gained control of land by conquest, in much the same way as did the Mongols of Asia, the Zulus of Africa, and the Polynesians of the South Pacific. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim. Isn't that what the native peoples were doing? Were travel, trade, and exploration invalid and unacceptable, or is man free to explore the world? But I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, and has a name. Okay. We have names for the rocks, trees, and creatures too. And if we don't, we will happily use the names given to them by others, like skunk or raccoon. You think the only people who are the people who look and think like you. But if you walk the footsteps of a stranger, you'll learn things you never knew you never knew. Well, I'd point out the tautology, but isn't that a two-way street? I mean, maybe after the Native Americans slaughtered the first Europeans, the settlers had good cause to fear the natives and to take action. Perhaps this is how the natives behaved with each other. The people of Hollywood who live on stolen land and burn oil stolen from that stolen land on their private jets, and who have enjoyed the incredible achievements and protections of the English settlers who fought and died to win their freedom, and who established the first free country in the history of civilization, with culture and laws protecting things like intellectual property rights, like things like movies. Those people would produce propaganda like this, directed at children? My point is that the media and the entertainment industry has been running an ongoing propaganda effort for generations. Pocahontas was just one of many iterations. But for the Marxists, femsexists, and of-color racists, it's now or never. Either they subvert the Constitution, destroy the family, and seize the minds of those they've worked to indoctrinate, our women and children, since the advent of television, or it was all for nothing. This is the moment of truth. They've carved us into separate identities and multicultures and turned our children and women against the men who founded and built our unique American culture. And they want to know if it's payday. And so they are testing the waters with censorship and cancel culture, abortion, mob protest, and mail-in voting. A free and just society rests on the shoulders of freedom of speech, religion, and political affiliation. But these values no longer hold in our urban centers and academia. There is but one institution that can stand up to our censorious nihilists. Truth, justice, and beauty can abide in our churches, synagogues, and meeting houses, and perhaps spread from there, but it needs a locus of support and individual effort. And that can only come from an organized community. I hope you will never watch another Hollywood production again without recognizing the evil and false propaganda buried in the story, because it is always there. Well, that's it for me. I'm Greg Jeffers for the American Quaker Friends Church. Thank you.